Each week at KVIL for the past 20 years or more now, we've done a program called Staff Meeting. So titled because members of our KVIL family just sit around and discuss the happenings of the week or something new they've discovered or read or simply what's on their mind at the time. Its worst and its best attributes are its complete informality. Over the years, Staff Meeting has been a Sunday morning haven for KVIL listeners and has always been well received, but a recent session with a surprise guest who found time to join us for the complete hour generated more reaction than any program in memory. The visitor was Dallas billionaire, patriot, and legend H. Ross Perot. Now, his record of activism and involvement on behalf of American servicemen and MIAs and POWs is probably unmatched in the whole world. His mark on Texas education is indelible, and of course his impact on the world of business goes without saying. So here then, by many requests, is the Sunday morning, January 13th edition of Staff Meeting as it was heard on KVIL radio at 9 a.m. Other than Mr. Perot, those around the table are KVIL's Michael Ray, Scott West, Mitch Carr, Bob Morrison, M.I. Blackwell, Jocelyn White, Terry King, News Director Peggy Sears, and me, Ron Chapman.
You really started speaking out about this in early December, and as I recall, you were at a meeting in Houston to talk to a number of city and government leaders in convention there, and they were all ready to hear you talk about education, and you came out with your stand. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your view of the situation today?
Well, I did talk about education. I talked about early childhood development and the importance of taking the disadvantaged child and giving that child a lot of preparation so that that child can learn how to learn, have a high regard for himself or herself. Then in the last half, these were the mayors. This was the National Conference of Mayors. I talked with them about the Middle East. I did this because since August, I've been speaking to people across the country, normally on business subjects. I've spoken to a total of 15,000 people. Since August the 2nd, I have opened every speech asking how many people in the audience have an immediate family member in the Middle East. I'm up to 8 at this point out of 15,000. I then said, can we agree that it's the people who work for you whose sons and daughters in the Middle East?
Ooh.
And we got an agreement on that. Now, but the reason I started doing this is I would go into the reception before the speech, and these folks were just rocking to go fight in the desert. And, you know, I felt compelled to remind them this is not an athletic contest. This is not the Super Bowl. War is a tough, dirty business where you may get killed, you may lose a leg, you may lose an eye, you may lose a hand, but you can have a life-altering experience in a hurry. So the real test in war, and this I learned this in Vietnam, is first commit the nation, then commit the troops. I went on to ask these people, bear with me for being so long-winded. I said, now, it's the people who work for you, got agreement there. I said, well, since you're so excited about this upcoming event, how many of you will send your son or daughter to fight in the desert? I'm still at 0 out of 15,000. So I said, okay, fine, but can we agree on this, that if we have people fighting in the desert, we should all be there with them in spirit? Oh, sure. So, well, all right, now then, I suggest we put in a war tax so that every one of us are reminded every payday that we have people whose lives are on the line for all of us. How many of you will go with me on that? I'm still 0 out of 15,000.
Wow.
What's my point? I concluded from those experiences, now this includes all of them, some of the most elite colleges in the country and business groups and so on and so forth. I concluded our people look on this as the second Super Bowl. They don't understand and have forgotten what war really is. They haven't thought it through. And I go back to Vietnam. First commit the nation, then commit the troops. If we didn't learn anything else from Vietnam, we should do that. That's what got me started.
Well, Mr. Perot, what is your feeling that the United States has not done a good job explaining the position we have taken to the people? And that, as you see it, the reasons that the President has given for our presence in the Middle East is not really why we're there.
There's been a good propaganda campaign to indoctrinate us coming out of Washington since this started. There has not been the normal press balance that you see where the press goes out and does its own work. The press, I think, have felt that they needed to keep the president in a strong negotiating position. So nobody has really looked at the facts. Facts are not as pretty as the propaganda. Now, step one, we're going to fight for the American way of life in the Middle East. Okay, fine. Now, but let's say, now I live in a little house in the Midwest. I work second shift. I've worked hard all my life. My 20-year-old son's in the desert. I never got any breaks, but I hope to realize all my hopes and dreams through him. When he gets out, he's got the GI Bill, and he will go to college. And I say, all right, it's the American way of life. Well, the Emir Kuwait has 7 personal 747s. He gets half the revenue from the oil that comes out of the ground. He's got 70 wives, and it goes downhill rapidly from there, but just in being graceful and tactful on radio, I'll cut it out at that point. That's hardly one of those noble goals that Americans fight for. So that starts right there. So the American way of life went out the window. The second one, we're fighting for jobs. Let me just make it real personal. I've lost my job. Ron's my friend. I go over and knock on his door, say, Ron, bad news, I lost my job. Ron says, Ross, can I help? And I say, yes, Ron, you can. But you're going to have to risk your life. I doubt if our friendship exists after that. Now, if I want to have an all-out fist fight with Ron, I say, Ron, yes, I have. You can help me. And your son has got to go put his life on the line for me. I mean, that would really catch your attention. So you don't give your life for somebody else's job. Then we were fighting over oil. Oil is the most worthless commodity in the world unless you sell it. Oil in the ground is not worth. Let's assume you're in the Middle East. You got sand, you got scorpions, you got Persian rugs, you got oil. Got camels. All right, now throw in everything. If the devil runs the Middle East, he'll sell the oil. So all of these reasons we were given just kind of kept falling apart and never sold to the American people. But the real thing is for the American people to understand this issue before we get into it. They need to understand who Hussein is, what our history is with Iraq. And if you're interested, I think we'll take a minute and we'll talk about, we created Hussein. Let's make no mistake about it.
Yeah.
He was our Noriega of the Middle East to do the dirty work we didn't want to do in Iran. All these weapons he's got, we gave him. All this ability to make chemical, nuclear, and bacteriological warfare, we licensed U.S. companies to sell him the equipment to do it. As we sit here today, Germans still run the chemical warfare plants inside Iraq. It's a greedy world, folks. 1,000 Russians are still working on the missiles. And since August the 2nd, we tried to ship a supercomputer through Brazil with government approval to a Brazilian company that was an Iraqi front company so that they can continue their research on nuclear weapons. Now, only in America would you do that with men on the battlefield. But that was just an honest, stupid mistake. But it happened. But that shows you the greed that exists in the world. We made him what he is today. We gave him billions. Now, here's one for the U.S. taxpayers. We have personally guaranteed $2 billion in his loans that he will not repay, so we, the taxpayers, will repay it. Mm-hmm. And gave him $5 billion in agricultural subsidies. He took $2 billion and bought weapons. Russia has flooded him with weapons. The conservative in Russia consider him an ally. If in the middle of this mess Gorbachev goes out of power, the hardliners come back in, you'll see an interesting shift in Russian policy. So we created our bad boy in the Middle East. Now let's go back for a minute, since we tend not to think, as Japan says, we only think 10 minutes ahead. Let's go all the way back to 1980. That's when he started building his nuclear. In 1981, he had it. Once they knew he had it, in May, they announced it, the world announced that he could make nuclear weapons. In June, the Israelis took it out with a surgical strike. Now, this is when it gets interesting. Saudi Arabia stepped up and said, this is terrible. We will build you a new nuclear facility, and we will pay for it and give it to you, Saddam. And Vice President George Bush publicly deplored the Israeli strike. Now, I'd like for someone at the White House to explain why it was a bad idea to get rid of his nuclear in 1981, and it's a good idea to get rid of it today. It was a better idea for him to never have it, but we made him what he is today. Now you're going up. 1984, he was gassing the Iranians. Chemical warfare against the Geneva Accords, on and on and on. That was in February. Right after President Reagan got reelected, we gave him full diplomatic recognition. That's what he got for nuclear warfare on the Kurds. Now, nobody in my audiences can remember who fired the missile that hit the USS Stark and killed 37 sailors. That's Saddam Hussein. He said that it was a mistake. He was going to compensate us for the loss of the ship and for the loss of lives. And now when this all came up, we checked again, and nobody ever, he never came through. And of course, the State Department never pushed him for it. Ron, did you have it?
I was just saying, because then we attacked two Iranian ships, did we not? Didn't we shoot down two Iranians as a result of the Iraqis? Yeah, we bombed two platforms of the Iranians as a result of the Iraqis shooting at us. I remember that.
It was a little garble. Now, in the middle of this, keep in mind, we look for these people like Saddam Hussein and Noriega to do our dirty work. Now, our new bad boy in the Middle East is Assad of Syria. Never forget for a minute who killed the 241 Marines in Lebanon and who blew up Pan Am 103 and killed 270 people, a lot of them Americans. A year ago, if I had come to this meeting and said, I will make you an open-ended bet that within 12 months the President of the United States will sit down with a man who killed our Marines in Lebanon, blew up Pan Am 103, you set the terms, you set the amount, I will bet that everybody around the table would have bet the bank that that couldn't happen.
Mr. Perot,
That's
don't you
happened.
think that we have adopted the Middle Eastern theory of the enemy of my enemy is my friend?
No, I would like to think we're that sophisticated, but I think, in fact, we're wandering around in the dark without a flashlight. We're well-intentioned. We don't know what we're doing. We've made a whole series of mistakes. Now, see, it keeps getting worse. Assad, in addition to blowing up our Marines in our Pan Am 103, then proceeded to kill thousands of people in his own country. And even worse, since August of 1990, he has committed the same rape, murder, plunder, and pillage in Lebanon that Hussein has committed in Kuwait, and yet he is our bad boy on the block, so we don't criticize him for that.
Mr. Perot, I heard you in a separate interview talk about the way the Arab thinks, and you said that if you ever walk into a room to negotiate with an Arab, you walk in feeling like he is superior, smarter than you, and that you're going to lose. Number one, I find that hard to believe. But number two, how does the Arab think? And maybe just kind of as a corollary, how about the Palestinian issue? How does that figure into this? Because I'm hearing it more and more, and the more I hear it discussed, the more it does seem to tie in.
Well, we tend to think in black and white. Arabs tend to think in 5 and 6 dimensions. In other words, when you're dealing with an Arab, for example, I like this meeting the other day that everybody said was a total failure. Based on everything I read, that would have been the beginning of an Arab negotiation. Let me give you an example. We're going down the desert road. We see a tent with a 3-legged, one-eyed camel tied beside it. We decide we want to buy it. We go in, we call inside the tent. The Arab comes out and we said, we'd like to buy the 3-legged, one-eyed camel. The Arab can't believe anybody will buy this camel. His first statement will be, it is my child's pet. It has been in my family 40 years. I could not consider selling the camel. I am offended that you stopped at my tent. Now, being good Americans, we'd get back in our car and say, gee, I'm sorry we upset the Arab, right? And the Arab's standing there saying, why didn't they negotiate? Now, that's the Middle East. That's the Middle East. So when you deal with them, you just have to understand that you can't look at their world through our eyes. Right. In any solution to this problem, we've got to make sure that Israel is protected. Now, that gets us to the Palestinian problem and the fact that the Palestinians don't have a homeland, and that is a source of tremendous instability in the Middle East. Now you've come to the final point in this whole thing. Our objective is to stabilize the Middle East. I urge you to read recorded history from 6,000 or 7,000 B.C. up until the present and show me any time when the Middle East was stabilized. Solomon could not stabilize the Middle East. The Middle East is an unstable place. We, under the actions we intend to take, will destabilize the Middle East because we'll make Assad the new strong man. That will make a bad situation worse. And we're, I think, putting... The thing that breaks my heart is that we're doing this with human lives rather than with negotiation and talk.
And isn't the aftermath the worst part of it, too? Because
always.
Are we not opening ourselves up to decades of terrorism in the United States, for example, and
well,
around?
But great question, Ron. There is no aftermath when we become involved. Let me explain what I'm trying to say. We go into Panama. First off, we had to go take care of Panama. Noriega was our bad boy. We let him get away with everything in the world. We let him send drugs into this country, but it was fine. He was our bad boy. Finally, he was an embarrassment to us. We had to take him out. We had him picked up by the Panamanian major. We couldn't make the decision to walk 400 yards across a park to get him. Then we couldn't even make the decision to walk 400 yards across the park to save the Panamanian major. Then we were embarrassed when he killed the major, so on and so forth, so we took him out. We haven't done a thing to help rebuild Panama. That country is devastated. The people are still living in tents. All we've done in the meantime is slip the tape to CNN and deny him money to hire his lawyer because we can't let Noriega go to court because he has got so much that will embarrass our senior government officials. Now, let's take another one. Nicaragua, Iran-Contra kept this country in gridlock for over a year and a half on hearings. Ortega was so comfortable in his position that he held free elections. Mrs. Chamorro won. It was a great chance for us. We have not lifted a finger to help her make Nicaragua successful as a democracy. There is no aftermath. The hard part starts after the fighting stops. Once it's out of the front pages, we jump on the 747s, we go look for another two-day summit, get a lot of headlines, make a lot of speeches, accomplish nothing. Let me change the subject for a minute. Education president. We've had a two-day summit in Williamsburg, Virginia, didn't move the ball an inch. That's what we're doing in the way our government runs now. The hard, dirty work is the after. No, you're right, absolutely right on the money. It will take us years to get the place cleaned up, stabilized, if we have the kind of destructive war we're talking about. And, you know, God bless us, we're just rushing in there. We think it's high noon in John Wayne time, and this is war. It's not a movie.
This is KVIL and staff meeting. Thank you for joining us this morning. If you've just tuned in, our special guest today is Ross Perot. Mr. Perot, I would like to read you something from Newsweek from August 20th. Right. And it said, the public mission of Operation Desert Shield is to keep Saddam out of Saudi Arabia and to force him out of Kuwait. The secret objective is to drive him out of power in Baghdad. President Bush has signed an intelligence finding order to the CIA to do whatever it can to destabilize Iraq politically and get rid of Saddam by almost any means short of killing him. Your reaction?
War is a tough, dirty thing. When you get down to what we ought to be doing here, step one, this is a UN problem. UN should get more involved. Well, I'm glad the UN is getting involved. We're the worst nation in the world to be in the lead because of our ties to Israel. When we finish, 185 million Saudis will hate us, no matter which side they fought on. Now, so we ought to get the UN into it. As unthinkable as it is to us in this country, King Hussein of Jordan is right. There will have to be an Arab solution. They will go in a tent, they will come out with a solution and embrace one another and declare themselves brothers for eternity. We won't understand it. We can't believe they made the deals with one another they did. 6 months from now, they'll be chewing on one another again. That's the Middle East. Okay. The Arab solution has some merit. We've got to protect Israel in all this. Now then, let's assume that we go through all of this kind of what I'll call negotiation. Churchill always said, talk, talk, talk is better than war, war, war. And Churchill was no sissy. But it doesn't hurt to talk. We haven't talked. All we've done is threaten so far. We ought to do a little talking before we put our men and women on the battlefield. Now, let's assume that doesn't work. Then I say we have a short meeting and say, what is it we really want to accomplish? We want to get rid of his nuclear, his chemical, his bacteriological, and then there'll be the guys in the room say, we got to get rid of him. Now, if anybody has a fifth or sixth item, we'll put that on the list, but we make our list. Getting rid of the first three is simple. We did it with a few F-111s in Libya, didn't clear it with the UN, didn't check with Mom, just went over there one night and turned Gaddafi into a choir boy, right? So you don't need 430,000 troops in the desert to get rid of his nuclear, chemical, and bacteriological. Israel showed us how to do it with his nuclear in 1981. But before we do this, we ought to pull together all of our friends from Italy, France, Germany, and around the world and say, now, it's really stupid to go in and knock all this stuff out if you are going to sell it to him again next week at a premium price. I would suggest to the American people on a broader issue that once a technology exists, the genie is out of the bottle and anybody with enough money can buy it because of human greed throughout the world. For example, if I said we will deny him the electric light, you'd sit here and laugh at me. You'd say, come on, Pro, someone will sell him generators, wire, and light bulbs, right? The technology exists. Same is true with nuclear, bacteriological, and chemical. So but let's assume we want to do that, we do it. Now then, let's assume the decision that everybody in the room says, but you just cannot tolerate the continuation of Hussein. My thought would be, well, who will replace Hussein? Right. Does anyone see George Washington in the Middle East? No, nobody does. Fine, but you go through and the group says you must take out Hussein. You don't need 430,000 people charging tanks, bacteriological weapons, and propane bombs. We got to talk about this propane bomb. You know where it came from, don't you? Made in the USA. Made in the USA. We gave them the licenses. The engineers in that company were so angry they went to Washington and pled with our government not to give it to him. It's better than a tactical nuclear weapon. We don't have to have our people facing all that to take out Hussein. That can be done simply, surgically, quickly, and it's not pretty. And I can see the faces in the room. You hate it because you think war is a Super Bowl, war is a contest. Let me tell you Colonel Arthur Sandman's first dictum in war. He says, when you find your enemy asleep, don't wake him up. Now, the typical U.S. attitude would be knock on the door, say, put on your boots, get your rifles loaded, let's come out, wait till good light, and then let's shoot at one another. That's not what war is, I'm sorry.
How easy, really, and I've heard you mention this, Mr. Perot, in several interviews and on Donahue, how easy is it really to take out Hussein? Just, I mean,
It's
a lot of money.
a lot easier than to buy a nuclear weapon.
Oh, okay. That's
Put it in
easy.
perspective. And we know you can get nuclear back there. Point is, this is the Middle East. Money talks. See? You know, now this is a mindlessly simple example, but, you know, one place you'd certainly like to know is cook, right?
Well, yes, that's it. That's you shoot the cook. That's the old theory. That's from marketing warfare.
Yeah, I know, but my point is, anybody that's worried about death thinks a lot about the person cooking his food. But the point is, I am not a proponent of this. I'm just saying that if you give me the choice of having 430,000 Americans out there with their lives being torn to pieces versus a surgical takeout of the man who caused it, that's the easiest decision we could possibly make.
What are you a proponent of? Should we have let him have Kuwait and let the Arabs work it out?
I'm a proponent of getting the UN involved, getting a UN force in the Middle East. We have plugged the gap. We have kept him from spreading, so on and so forth. We can continue to play a role, but this needs to be a world project. Japanese are rolling around on the floor laughing at us. The KGB is rolling around, and this is true. This is not supposition. Japanese can't believe we didn't make a 50-year deal for $10 oil if we were going to go over there and do all this. Now, you know, the average good old boy in Texas could have thought of that, right?
Yeah.
You know, if we're going to do all this, we're going to have cheap energy forever out of these suckers. Now, the KGB can't believe that we are pouring $500 million a day while we sit there. $15 billion a month is the cost. Once we start to fight, $3 billion a day, $90 billion a month. This is a different subject, folks. We can't afford to be there. We're broke. We're $3 trillion in debt. Now, you say, but wait a minute. It's rape, murder, plunder, pillage. And we must go stop that. Now, that's the American way. I say, terrific. I'm with you 100%. Let's start in Washington, D.C., New York, Philadelphia, Detroit. Got some of it in Dallas. Let's clean it out in this country and work our way to the Middle East. It's going to be a while before we get there. Then, you say, well, what about chemical warfare? We got to stop that now. I say, fine. It's being just saturation bombing coming into our children every day across this country in the way of drugs. That's chemical warfare of the worst kind. Let's start there and work our way to the Middle East. It's a dirty world.
Mr. Perot, let's talk about reaction. You are, at the very least, perceived as a multi-millionaire who's a button-down conservative. A lot of people, when they think of the word patriot, think of Ross Perot. When you think of war protesters, you think of peaceniks left over from the 60s. You've totally changed. I know that last week I picked up the paper and saw the story about you on the Donahue show, read your comments, and it made me sit up and think. How about other people? What kind of reaction are you getting?
I've gotten thousands of letters from a National Press Club speech. It's fascinating. I get about, after they're all spread out, you know, flat, by the time I get them, it's a foot and a half thick a day. And that speech was made on December the 6th. And the interesting thing is I'm still getting that volume of mail through yesterday. Have 3 negative responses. All I'm asking the people to do is, you know, don't sit here and think of this as a contest. This is the dirtiest thing man can get into. And don't wait until you see American bodies coming home dead. And now there's the other side of it. The 3 networks will be filming all the horror in Baghdad if we're bombing Baghdad. And you remember the little Vietnamese girl running down the street aflame?
Yeah.
You'll be seeing a lot of that on television. So if you don't have the stomach for that, face it before we start, because you get a bunch of our guys killed, you get a bunch of people killed needlessly. I want the American people to understand it. I want them to notify their 2 senators and their congressmen of what they want them to do. When I started, I wanted to make sure Congress got into the act. Congress is into the act, thank goodness. Only Congress can declare war. This continuing to allow the president to make this decision is really eliminating a safeguard in our Constitution.
Why doesn't President Bush catch on to this? He seems to be so pro-war. He sent all those troops over there just to make a stand to say, see, we can, we can flex our fist if we need to. Is this what this is? Is this just or is he truly wanting to go to war?
Well, I don't know what's in his head. The thing that disturbs me most is he has personalized war. I've never heard a president talk about war in the first person. I've never heard a president threatened in the first person. I said the other day that, look, if these guys want to have a first-person war, let's turn it over to Don King. Let's schedule it in Atlantic City. Let's have 15 rounds and get it over with, and we can put millions of dollars in their pockets and in the U.S. Treasury. We'll have a hell of an event. Now, but that's, see, it's easy for me to play like I'm John Wayne, Clint Eastwood, and High Noon and the whole thing if you're going to go out and do the dirty work for me.
Right.
But the sad, I've got to tell you this puts it all in perspective. The rich lady was going to the opera. She had on her furs and her jewelry, and she was walking down the street. And she came upon a poor woman with one child in each hand. And she looked at her haughtily and said, "And madam, where are your pearls?" And the poor woman pointed to her children and says, "These are my pearls." We got 430,000 pearls in the Middle East. If they have to fight for our country, they will, and they will do a great job. But just wasting them without knowing why, without having the American people totally supportive, that's what I'm after. I am not a peacenik. I am not a, and you can just go back and look at the record. When the time comes to do it, I'll do it. But I don't want to repeat the mistake of Vietnam, where we sent men and women off to die and gave them no support. Saddest story I ever heard about Vietnam. A highly decorated veteran came home, spoke in his hometown, was booed when he stood up to speak, made a dignified speech, then had a question and answer period. The first question was, "Why in the world did you go to Vietnam?" I loved his reply. He said, "I thought you would know because you sent me. We're sending them, we should know."
Can we talk about something else? You said to me sometime back when we were talking on the air, Ross Perot, and by the way, this is staff meeting on KVIL and a very special edition of it. Ross Perot is a very special guest. The opinions obviously are his own, and they're always fascinating, and I don't know if you agree with them or not, but they're always interesting. You said to me sometime back when I was asking you about the governor, in that case it was Bill Clements, you said very quickly, well, the governor doesn't matter. The guy you got to watch is the lieutenant governor or the speaker of the House. You still hold to that? That's what makes things happen in Austin?
They have the power in Austin.
Okay, so then it doesn't really matter whether it was Clayton Williams or Ann Richards, basically, in your opinion?
The pauses are his own.
It doesn't matter.
No.
In that case...
But now let me comment here.
Okay.
No, the short answer is no. But I think the people of Texas ought to sit down and really look themselves in the mirror and say, wait a minute. We ought to make sure we have two candidates of such quality every time we have an election that you could flip a coin and it doesn't matter who wins. See? Now, let's take the Republican Party. I think I can prove to you that the folks in the Republican Party got more than their share of the breaks. They got the college educations, good jobs, so on and so forth, and they ought to be able to think.
That's a generalization, but okay.
I understand, but I mean, at least you got all the training to think.
Right.
Now, only in America, and I guess only in Texas, would that group with the backgrounds from the good schools and the good educations and the good jobs and the money and so on and so forth be attracted to a television ad of a man sitting on a horse playing cowboy that has nothing in the world to do with taking Texas into the 21st century. There's another sad commentary on that election, and that is, it's a commentary on how dumb we are. It's a part of the reason I'm so active on this issue on the war, because we sit there and whatever television tells us, we just sort of say, well, that's it. And if you hear day after day after day this message, and nobody else can afford to put up a comparable message on television, that results in a win unless that individual then proceeds to have self-inflicted wounds, that finally take him out. It's a sad commentary on our system, and one I hope we'll learn from.
How about to further explore that, the tax increase in October that we railed about, and then turned around and had a 98, 99% re-election of incumbents. Do you see that as an extension?
Tell the people what they want to hear. Lenin coined that phrase.
Right.
It worked beautifully in our 1988 election. No new taxes, watch my lips. Well, come on, give me a break. Just look, people say, did that upset me? I said, no, I understood the numbers. I knew it was a con job. I just hoped the people wouldn't buy it. The people loved it. Tell the people what they want to hear. When you're $3 trillion down, you can't pay your bills. When your principal exports from New York Harbor are scrap steel and scrap paper going to Japan, You're a third world nation. Now, we have got, see, we're playing used to be. We still think about what we were in the 50s. We were the envy of the world. All the big banks were here. We were the manufacturing. In 1960, 75% of the cars made in the world were made here. Now it's 25%. A lot has changed. And we sit here. I think it is absolutely appropriate that as Congress closed its session and raised taxes and did all those dumb things from the economic summit that they did, and thank God Congress stopped a lot of them they were trying to do, that they appropriated $500,000 for Lawrence Welk's house. Because this is wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Now that's, see, we sit here and let this country deteriorate, and we want that wonderful, wonderful, wonderful message. We've got work to do. We can fix it. We can turn it around, but we can't do it sleepwalking and sucking our thumb, and that's what we're doing right now.
Okay, let me go back to Austin. If the governor doesn't count, if it didn't matter.
No, he counts, but the real power is in the lieutenant governor and speaker.
How are we fixed for a lieutenant governor in Bob Bullock?
Very interesting. Bob Bullock is a really smart. I've worked with him on education reform. Had no contact with him prior to that time. He voluntarily decided that he was going to take the toughest, nastiest part of education reform, and that is getting the money for the disadvantaged children. No other elected official wanted to touch it. Believe me, the disadvantaged folks don't have a lot of political muscle in this state. Bob Bullock did it because he thought it was right. I asked him after the committee meeting, I said, Bob, are you sure you want to do this? He says, yes, I want to do this. So I have enormous respect for a man who basically said, if this puts my political career on the line, so what? It's the right thing to do. He came up with an equalization plan that if we could have gotten it through the legislature would have avoided all the turmoil that we've had. So, and I've had one really interesting experience with Bob. He is smart, he is tough, he will put it all on the line for what he believes is right, and so I think we're in good shape there.
Okay, what about the speaker?
It's unfortunate that we're starting the session with this indictment process.
We're speaking of Gib Lewis, of course.
Yes. Now, let me go back to my one intense experience with the speaker. It was Father's Day. Call it the Father's Day Massacre. All the special interests had surrounded the House, and education reform was on the rocks. I saw him call in his committee chairman. I saw him act like Sam Rayburn used to act, and when he was in the House of Representatives. He called in the chits, and he did it for 3 million Texas children, and there was not a thing in it for Gib Lewis because all the PAC money comes out of these special interest groups from education.
Yes.
You know, mom and dad out there with their kids, they may send in a little donation, but the school teachers and the principals and the coaches and the vocational ed folks and all these folks that are building school buildings and stadiums, they're there with big dollars. Gib did the right thing. He turned it around, and the first vote he won by a narrow margin, and then from that point on it was a steamroller. They even brought in a train whistle because the train was leaving the station, and anybody that wanted to be on board better get on board. He turned education reform around. So I've seen a lot of strength and a lot of goodness in him, too.
So is some of the good news today our Austin situation? Would you say we're in pretty fair hands, you're saying?
Well, we'll be in, if the indictment thing can be over with and everybody can go back to business, we've got our work cut out for us down there. And I think that, you know, we certainly, Ann Richards is a very bright, talented person, and I think that, you know, I anticipate that she would work closely with those two, and hope we'll have a good session.
Well, Ross, what are your views on the recent Dallas City Council election?
You mean in terms of the 10-4-1 and the
14-1 and whatever?
Well, in all candor, I'm confused. I can talk in a lot more depth about the Middle East and about all these other issues than I can in Dallas politics because I just get totally confused, and I hope that I am not typical of the citizenry, but it's just like nothing works down there. Everybody goes down and yells and screams at one another every Wednesday, and that's about it. And that does not serve the people of our city.
That's about how I see it.
This is
under the new plan, though, there'll be more of them to do that.
This is government this is sort of government by zoo down there. You know, all the animals just rage at one another, and then, you know, they close it down for another week. In the meantime, I would like for every citizen in this town to go to the poorer parts of Dallas and understand, forget for a moment, we have all of this great concern about people in jail, and I am concerned about people in jail. But I am far more concerned about innocent people in jail. And we have millions of innocent people in jail across our country, and we've got a good representation right here in our town. You drive through those neighborhoods and you'll see little houses with bars on the windows and bars on the doors. These people did everything right. In many cases, they did it before Martin Luther King. They did it the hard way, and they put their children through school. They are good citizens. They've got a little house. They maintain their yard. They've got nice things in their house. Many of them are retired, and they live in terror every night because we have abandoned them. Now, that's what we ought to be working on in our city. We ought to be turning this. We have, whose alabaster cities gleam undimmed by human tears. That's what I'd like to set as our standard, and get to work on that as opposed to this 3 hours of ego that we get once a week down there in City Hall.
Talk to me about
That upset everybody, but I'm sorry.
No.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the European community. Is it going to work? Will Europe become one nation?
Interesting question. First off, I think it's really important that every American understand we did not know the walls were coming tumbling down. We were just surprised. Now, because they came tumbling down, all the opinion polls indicate we gave our leaders credit for making it happen.
Yes.
Just happened to be standing there when, it's kind of like standing there when somebody drives up and gives away $1 million. It's not as though you made it. But fine. We didn't know it was going to happen. Sad commentary when you consider how much we spend on intelligence gathering, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but it happened, and that's a plus, right? That's a plus. It happened. God bless them. It happened. Every citizen here ought to spend. Now, there are a lot of people listening to me probably that think, the citizen is frustrated, can't get anything done. Never forget Lech Walesa, a shipyard worker in Poland who changed the world. Never forget him. And never forget what he said to our Congress. God bless him for that. He stood up before our entire Congress and said, words are plentiful, but deeds are precious. We are the biggest talkers in the world, and if we have now, here's City Hall today. We got potholes in the street, right?
Right.
We're going to have a press conference on potholes.
Right. Right.
Now, I would love to see the folks at City Hall get a shovel, hot asphalt, fill the potholes, and not have a press conference. But that's not the American way. I have never answered your question. Back to
The European community.
No,
Can
it
Europe
happened.
become
It
one?
was a miracle. It was a miracle. But it got off the front pages. See, then we did Panama, and that knocked it off the front pages. Then we had the election in Nicaragua, and that knocked it off the front pages. And come August, and we've never talked about July 25th. And I'll come back later on that. But ask me about Ambassador Glaspie and her meeting on July the 25th. But come August, we had a new main event. Don King, new main event. And so we have ignored Eastern Europe. Our primary emphasis should be on our problems in this country. Any energy we have left over should be to help Eastern Europe succeed in its revolution. We're not doing anything to help those people. Well, we started doing something after we bought their vote in the UN. We gave them $1 billion. Yeah, that's another subject if you want to get into it. The most expensive vote we ever got in history was that UN vote that allows us to do all the fighting.
Yeah.
And guess who pays for it? All you folks sitting around the table and all you folks listening.
If you're just joining us, this is KVIL's staff meeting program on Sunday, January 13th. The regular cast and crew is here, but our special guest you've just heard is H. Ross Perot, who has joined us today. He has been quite in the news recently. He was on Donahue earlier this week on the Larry King radio talk show. And tomorrow, Monday, he'll be on the Today Show. So if you missed any part of this program, you can catch him also tomorrow on NBC. Mr. Perot, the situation in Texas that we face has 3 of the 4 major things the state's responsible for: criminal justice, welfare, and education in the court system.
Right.
With the old question, if you were king, what are some of the first things that the legislature and the new leadership in the state ought to do to try and get us A, out of the courts, and B, on the right road?
If I could rephrase that, if I were invited to speak to a joint session, as a citizen, okay, that's more realistic.
All right.
Maybe that's unrealistic too. But
We'll send this tape to them.
okay, but I would say exactly what I said on education reform. I'd say, look, if we could go back and rewrite history, would we have been wiser as a people to recognize that we needed to integrate our schools and integrate them intelligently, or to stand back and let the courts do it? And that really cleared everybody's heads. We could have done a much better job if we had all worked together to do it. Now, I would also say I suggest that we face reality. Number one, we ought to love one another. And if we can't love one another and get along with one another, then we all ought to accept that in order to succeed and win as a state or country, We have to effectively get along with one another. And for the few diehards left, I suggest to you that we're stuck with one another because nobody is going to leave the country.
Right.
That should get us back up to 1 or 2, right? Don't let judges do this. Let's figure out what's right, what's fair. Let's do it, and believe me, it will be 50 times better. Everybody sitting around this table could have improved over what the courts did on integration. Now, here's the sad part. Let's assume that the minute the court did it, it seemed brilliant. I have never done anything in my life, and I suggest probably you have not either, that as you proceeded forward with doing it, you couldn't make tremendous improvements based on your experiences as you go. If you have a court order, you're frozen. Now, that's what you give up. And what do you really want? You want the best criminal justice system. You want the best school system in the world. Cut this business out in the United States. Being best in the United States doesn't win you any prizes except for best personality or something. You got to go for best in the world. And the quicker we face, we're like drunks. Step one is to admit you're drinking, right? Then you can stop. We haven't admitted yet that we're losing the game. Let me just ramble 1 minute. If I had come to you in 1950 and said, in our lifetimes, the 2 economic superpowers in the world will be Japan and Germany,
Wow.
you'd have probably had me led away in a straitjacket.
Mm-hmm.
They came out of the ashes of World War II. Adversity builds strength and commitment and determination, and today they are the 2 economic superpowers. 9 out of 10 of the largest banks in the world are in Japan. I can remember clearly when they didn't have anything. I had an electrician stop me and say, Ross, how did that happen? It's really simple. We had the money. They started making better things than we did. We bought their things with our money. What used to be our money is in their banks. What used to be their things are in our homes. Those things we bought from them get less valuable every day. Cars, stereos, you name it.
Right.
Our money gets more valuable every day, and they're out here buying everything, all of our movie companies, Yellowstone Park concessions. I guess they won't get to keep that.
Oh, yeah.
But on and on and on and on and on. And, well, you know the story. I mean, they couldn't take Hawaii in 1941, but they bought it.
Yeah, so we've become consumers and not producers.
For a while. But, see, we're living in a fool's game. In 1980, we were the largest creditor nation on earth. In 1990, we're the largest debtor nation in the history of man. We are living on credit. You are my rich uncle. I am worthless. As long as you will give me money, I can live like a king. I can have the jets. I can have the house in Palm Beach. I can have the yachts. I can match Don Trump's lifestyle. Who have our rich uncles been the past 10 years? All these folks that had what used to be our money, the Germans and the Japanese, were buying our treasury bills. We were spending beyond our means. It's really pretty simple. You don't have to go to Harvard and study economics. On a personal basis or a national basis, if you spend more than you've got, you're getting in deeper and deeper trouble. And that has become a disease in our country from the personal level all the way up to Washington. State, county, local, and Washington. We've got to cut it out.
In the same vein, the common thinking is that we are changing rapidly from a manufacturing industrial economy to a service economy. Now, as a major force in embarking us in that with the information that you've provided in the decades past.
No, I manufactured information. I didn't provide services. I had a factory that, and have factories that make information. Yeah, the biggest joke in the world, the service economy, that includes all the fast food restaurants, Kentucky Fried Chickens, all, wonderful, but you get minimum wages in those places. When you're making cars, when you're making steel, when you're manufacturing the goods for the, that make the world go around, that's where the good wages are. That's good for the people, and also I'd like for all our folks to be making a lot of money because then they can pay a lot of taxes, and Lord knows we need the money in Washington, right? The guy making minimum wage doesn't pay any taxes. These service jobs don't pay anything. See, Japan has nothing. They don't have iron. They don't have oil and gas. They import everything across the Pacific. Just look at the disadvantage, the inherent. How do they win? The commitment of their people. Now I have to really stir the audience up here with this one. The 2 economic superpowers of the world got new governments in 1945. We've got a 200-year-old government. They've got a government that was designed for 1945. Our government doesn't work. Their governments work terrifically. Read Agents of Now, this is not necessarily their government, but this will show you one of their competitive reasons. Read Agents of Influence. It's a new book. It's a classic of what's wrong with our country. Japanese decided they wanted to get their trucks declared as cars coming into this country because you reduce the import tariff from 25% to 2.5%. Mm-hmm. They spent $3 million lobbying to get it done. The big three fought them every step of the way. Customs turned them down. That's like saying, here is an elephant, I want you to call it a horse. You know, Customs said, no, you can't do that. But we owed the Japanese. Now, this is the way the system works. We owed the Japanese one, and the Secretary of Treasury came in and just said, give it to them. Now, someday I hope to know why. We still don't know why. There was no congressional vote. Gave it to them. Then they said, well, there's something else we want. We want these trucks. Excuse me. Yeah, now we've got trucks declared as cars. Now we want them declared as trucks again when we put them on the lot because they have high emissions and low mileage. We don't want to pay a penalty. They got that too. Right. That cost them $3 million in lobbying one time. That saves them $500 million a year in taxes every year. Their government is all over that. So to make sure to give them a competitive advantage. Car sales are down by all of our manufacturers. Japanese car sales are still rocking. Number one, they're good cars. But, I mean, they give those guys every edge they can, and their government is squarely behind them doing it. That's a government designed for the future. We got a government designed for history where everybody talks and does nothing.
Okay. We're hearing Ross Perot, who says wonderful things that either make you go, why haven't we been saying that before, or they enrage you, and they may do both, which is interesting. You are one of the great thinkers of our time. Whether anyone agrees with you or not is irrelevant. You're a thinker. You're a visionary. Why aren't you running the country? Why aren't you the king? Why haven't you put your hat in the ring and done something? What keeps you out of it?
First, let me respond to your point. It doesn't upset me at all if there are people out listening to our session today who are really upset and angry. Yeah. If there's someone who's listened this far and has just mellowed out, I'm upset.
Yes.
See, I don't care where you stand as long as you stand somewhere. I don't care if you disagree with me. The thing that's killing this country is the people that don't know where the light switch is. Don't stand anywhere. Just kind of wandering around saying, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Now, as we go down the tubes. So that doesn't bother me a bit. I am not in public life. People have asked me since 1968. Somebody ran a poll that said I could be elected governor. I've never run for dog catcher. 2 or 3 times I thought about running for city limits because things are getting pretty hot. But that's about as far as it goes. I don't have the personality or temperament to be in public life. I am action-oriented, probably to a fault. If I see a snake, my tendency is just kill the snake, move on, take care of the next problem. And probably I would just be, I've always felt I was the wrong personality, the wrong temperament, in a world where people talk instead of act.
Okay, but you could change that. Don't you ever some night before you go to bed think, if I were there, I'd hate the campaign, I'd hate the schmoozing, I'd hate the fundraising, but once I got there, I could make a difference. I mean, haven't you ever thought that?
No, I think I honestly have never thought that. From time to time, I work on projects. I enjoy doing that because I get to come and go, and normally by the time I go, everybody's, glad to see me gone for a while. But because it's been pretty intense. But I just don't think I am the right personality to be involved in all the slow dancing and waltzing that takes place, and the lack of action, when it just seems obvious about what we have to do to make things work for the benefit of the people. I'd be a square peg in a round hole. Let me say this, though. If I were ever there, I sure wouldn't have this confrontational attitude between Congress and the White House in either place. And the message I would like to send is you guys better hold hands, team up, and work together. And we sure don't need all of these arrogant White House staffers who didn't get elected by anybody, who were so rude to Congress during the summit meeting, the economic summit meeting. That was very destructive, and that would really hurt the people in this country. Everybody that's all upset right now, just listen to me for a minute. Remember, if you will, we own this country. They don't. It is our country, and if there are 250 million of us, we each own 250 millionth of it. It's ours. We elect them, and they are our servants. I'd like for them to act like our servants. And I don't see a whole lot of that now. And I believe that if, one message we better send Washington and maybe City Hall and wherever we need to send it is you are the servants of the people, act like the servants of the people, be responsive to us and not to the $400 million a year pouring in from Japan just to Congress, which is the amount of money it took to run the campaigns for everybody who ran for the House and Senate in 1988.
Term limits has come up as a major topic.
Yeah.
Vice President Quayle, among others, leading the charge on the national level, others on the local level. It's being tried now in some places, the idea of term limits. Is that a step in the right direction toward making them more responsive?
I think it's an interesting debate. It's an interesting discussion. You need some people there that have some miles on them, have some experience, have some historical memory. I'd hate to have a whole new group every time. It's a valid point. I believe it's more complex than that. So that's where I come out on that. I think it's something we should consider, but it will create some new problems when we do it.
We're down to the last 8 minutes of the show, and we're also down to the last couple of days before the January 15th deadline, so maybe the last couple of minutes focusing on the Middle East situation.
Could I spend a minute talking about August 25th?
Yeah, we were supposed to ask you about that.
Yeah,
what happened? Wasn't it July 25th?
Ambassador Glaspie, with written instructions from Secretary of State Jim Baker, approved by the President of the United States, went in to see our bad boy of 10 years, Saddam Hussein, and said that she wanted to ask him in the spirit, these are quotes, in the spirit of friendship and not in confrontation, about massing troops on the border. Then went on to say, we have no treaty with Kuwait, and we will not become involved in your Arab dispute. And basically said, you can take the northern part of the country and you can take the islands and the port. And that's just plain Texas talk. That's what all that oblique State Department talk meant. That was the 25th. We watched this guy gear up for war. We watched him mass 100,000 troops, turn on the radars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. CIA, NSA, everybody was running into the White House saying, he's coming, We knew he was coming to take the northern part of Kuwait. That's the deal we cut. Now, you listen to all this high-minded Boy Scout stuff coming out of the White House now. This is like saying you can be a little bit of a rape, murder, plunder, and pillager, but you can't be the whole country. So let's cut it out. Now then, we're down now to, Ambassador Glaspie used good judgment. She left the country.
Yes.
But in the classic traditions of our State Department, they did not tell a single American tourist or a single American worker in Kuwait or Iraq that a conflict was pending. And that's because it's just going to be this little deal we cut. Comes August the 2nd, he took the whole thing, and our bad boy was like Noriega. He was out of control. And now we have to take him out, and we're going to take him out with somebody's pearls. 430,000 of our great people in the desert. Now, just remember, Kipling, two things from Kipling. He wrote, we don't treat our armed forces right. In May of this year, I was asked to go on a committee to find jobs for enlisted men who had pledged 20 years of service to our country. We were going to throw them out early, and they would not get their retirement. That's where we were before this came up. Kipling wrote about it in a poem called Tommy. It's Tommy this and Tommy that, and chuck him out the brute. That's in May. But it's savior of his country when the guns begin to shoot. Then it's Tommy this and Tommy that, and anything you please. But Tommy ain't no blooming fool. You bet that Tommy sees. These guys in the desert aren't stupid. They know. Now, they are patriotic. They are idealistic. They want to do the right thing for us. And we have a tremendous obligation to commit the nation before we commit the troops. And one last piece of advice from Kipling about the Middle East. He wrote about that, too. And the end of the fight is a tombstone white and the name of the late deceased. And the epitaph drear is, a fool lies here who tried to hustle the East.
Wow. You have been hearing H. Ross Perot on KVIL staff meeting. Mr. Perot, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insight with us this morning. Next time you come, would you please have a few opinions on some things?
Come out of your show, would you?
Okay. Okay.
No, we'd love to have you back anytime you
No, but Ron intimidates me.
All right, we'll put your number in the cash call computer.
Well, what a special hour this has been, and we thank you all so much for being with us this morning. In addition to Mr. Perot, our appreciation to those around the table this morning who have been enjoying this as well. Scott West, Bob Morrison, M.I. Blackwell, Ron Chapman, Terry King, Mitch Carr, Michael Ray, and Jocelyn White. I'm Peggy Sears on KVIL Highland Park and KVIL FM, Highland Park, Dallas, Fort Worth.
Thank you. Thank you.